People have to learn how to change their brain waves to get into their autonomic nervous system to begin to reprogram. The latest research in neuroplasticity tells us we're not hardwired to be a certain way for the rest of our lives. The latest research in epigenetics says we're not doomed by our genes, that in fact we're marvels of adaptability and change. So as a person started to contemplate and think about, who do I want to be when I open my eyes? What would it be like to be happy? What would it be like to live a new life? The frontal lobe is looking out into the landscape of the entire brain because it has connections to the entire neocortex, and it's got to resolve the problem. So it starts calling up different networks of neurons that are relevant to the question based on the knowledge the person learns or the experiences that they had, and it begins to seamlessly piece together this new understanding, and that's called intention. And so if you're reading a book about how to become more happy, or if you're reading a book on how to be a leader in your life, or you're studying the process, every time you learn something new, you add new connections to your brain. So now you have the raw materials for you to imagine even more. The act of mentally rehearsing begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like it's already happened. Doing that, the hardware becomes a software program, which means you start thinking like a genius. You start acting like a happy person because there's no mystery there, because you installed the circuits. And then these people didn't wait for their wealth or their health to feel gratitude and to feel empowered or to feel love, a love for life. They began to feel those emotions ahead of the experience. And their body, as the unconscious mind, doesn't know the difference between the experience in their life that creates the emotion and their emotion that they're creating by thought alone. The body's believing it's living in the future, in the present moment. And the stronger the emotion that they felt, the more they're going to pay attention to the thoughts they're thinking. And now all of a sudden, they're changing their biology from living in the past present reality to living in the future present reality. And I was so intrigued by this process that I went back to school to study neuroscience, because it was the answer in the internal process of rehearsing and imagining. They had long moments where they lost track of time and space. And in order for us to change, I realized that we have to get beyond our environment. And what's our environment made of? People, husbands, kids, bosses, objects, things, places. You got to get beyond your emotions, your body, your pain, your disease, and you got to get beyond this concept of linear time. So when we get beyond our body, our environment, and time, we become pure consciousness. And now that consciousness can begin to connect to the consciousness of the field. And all of a sudden I realized that when people are nobody, no one, no thing, nowhere, time, that's the moment. They're no longer a face, they're no longer a culture, they're no longer a skin color, they're no longer a mother, they're no longer a grandmother, no longer a doctor or an attorney, they're no longer a nurse, they're pure consciousness. And that is the element that we begin to connect to something greater. So I wrote a book about it. And then I wound up on this documentary called What the Bleep Do We Know? And that became an overnight sensation. And we did all these conferences, all the scientists all over the world. And at the end of every conference, we had panel discussions. And I started listening to the people's questions during those panel discussions. And they asked really three important questions. How do we do it? Which is a good question. How do our thoughts affect our body or our life? Second question, if our personality creates our personal reality, and it does, and our personality is made up of how we think, how we act, and how we feel, in order for me to change my personal reality, I have to change my personality. Why the hell is it so hard to change? And I thought that was a really good question. And the third thing was, what do you do? So I started teaching these Friday night, all day Saturday events and giving people the understanding of brain science and brain waves and the quantum model, and showing them pictures of neurons connecting and disconnecting, what neural nets are and how the brain works and what focus concentration looks like, and begin to create something where people could really begin to practice at home. And basically I said, okay, well, if these are the four principles that these people used in my first book to heal based on my investigation, It should work for sick people or normal people. The process is exactly the same. We got to unlearn and relearn. We got to break the habit of the old self, reinvent the new self. We got to unfire and unwire and refire and rewire. We have to prune synaptic connections and sprout new connections. Unmemorize emotions stored in the body, and then we have to recondition the body to a new mind and to a new emotion, to stop signaling the same genes in the same way and begin to signal new genes in new ways, to pull our attention and our energy out of the familiar past and begin to invest our attention and energy into a new future, to go from the known to the unknown. The model was built, and we started doing these workshops all over the world, from Australia to Mexico to Colombia to Canada to the United States to South Africa to all over Europe. We were teaching these events, and to be honest with you, the first year I didn't see many changes. We saw some people be happier, a greater sense of well-being, but no real breakthroughs. But at the end of these introductory level courses, people would ask, can you teach another level? So I taught a level 2, and then at the end of that, they said, if you teach another level, then we taught a level 3, and then they said, can you teach another level? And I said, I don't know anything else. But right around that point, I started having some really profound mystical experiences. Those mystical moments were so profound that I couldn't go back to be Joe Dispenza again. And all of a sudden, I realized that every time I had one of those mystical moments, the first thing that I came to when I came back to who I was I have this all wrong. Like some layer of conditioning, how we're so unconscious to how we view the world. Some veil was lifted. And then all of a sudden, I got very passionate about the mystical, and so we started teaching a level 3.5. And then right around this time, all of a sudden, people started sending the emails in. My God, I was diagnosed with this condition. I was trying to get this job, and I changed my energy, and I changed this, and I started doing the work, and my body's healthy. Here's the blood tests, here's the scans. And all of a sudden, we started seeing that it started to catch on. And so I wrote my second book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. It was a great success, and there was a great meditation in there and a how-to. And I watched many people right around this point start to make really profound changes in their health right during our events. So we went from a level 3.5 to a level 3.5 pi, and we started seeing spontaneous remissions right in our events. And all of a sudden, I knew that I had to change everything. So then I gathered a team of scientists and researchers and said, what is going on here? I knew that it was happening in real time. So I gathered a team of researchers and scientists, and we started measuring. We started measuring brainwaves. We've done over 8,000 quantitative scans on the brain, measure people that came into our event. We started doing 4.5-day, 5 days events so that we could have people for a substantial amount of time measure their brain before they came. At the end of 4 or 5 days, measure their brain at the end. And I would say, I want to know the changes are not just in their mind. And all of a sudden, we realized that we had, in our first 2 advanced workshops, these 4 and 5 day events, when we started studying the brain scans, 91% of the people that came had a more than 80% change in their brain for the better. So we knew that we were doing something really right. And then we started randomly selecting different people, and we started studying their brains when they were going through the process of internal change. In other words, in real time, I wanted to know what those elements were that allowed the person to connect. I can tell you that the personality doesn't change the personality. I can tell you the ego doesn't change the ego. I can tell you that matter takes a long time to change matter, that the brain takes a long time to change the brain. Only when you become pure consciousness, that consciousness is the phenomena above the brain and matter. And we started realizing that when people are stressed out or they're emotional,